Now for the Falcons, it's one of those years. It's going to be one of those transitionary years. Or no, it's not even going to be a transitionary year. Why? We're going to get into it right now. For the Atlanta Falcons, it was kind of a weird year, 2021. You come up with one, on paper, one of the weirdest rosters that you have. A lot of players are on short-term contracts, and half of them are pretty old veteran players. And then midway through the season, you lose Calvin Ridley because he wants to focus on his mental health, and I can't blame him for that. And despite everything that's happening, you finish the season 7-10, and you were in contention for a playoff spot until you got beaten by the 49ers in week 15. But then again, you were only in that spot because you managed to beat some crappy teams at the last second, but then you got whooped when it mattered most by playoff contenders. So for the Atlanta Falcons, it was just one of those situations where it's like, okay, we didn't do pretty terribly, but at the same time, it's like we shouldn't have won this many games with a pretty mediocre roster. So it's like we kind of overachieved with said mediocre roster. So one of the biggest questions going into their offseason was, what do they do with Matt Ryan? Like, what do they do with them? Should they keep him on because he had a pretty big contract cap hit, or do they try to trade him? So that was one of the big questions going to the offseason. Another thing that should happen for the Falcons, as I mentioned in my season recap, was the emergence of Cordell Patterson in that offense, because I liked Cordell Patterson. I really liked him in that offense in Arthur Smith's offense. He was like a good receiver, and he was also like a good running back. So he basically did the Deebo Samuel role, but I think he was very durable, more durable with it. So that should have been the Falcons' one of the top priorities for the Falcons. And unfortunately, they also were pretty crappy on the defensive end, especially at the defensive line, because, well, they couldn't generate any pressures. They couldn't generate any sacks. So they needed some quality pieces on that defensive rush, especially when one of your key pieces, Dante Fowler, was going to be a free agent. Unfortunately, they didn't have that much money to spend, so it was going to be very difficult for them to address some of their key priorities in that offseason. So looking at some of their moves that they made during the offseason in free agency and the draft, they did manage to re-sign Cordell Patterson. So they get a key piece of him, a key piece of their offense back in the fold. They also signed running back Damian Williams from the Chicago Bears because they did lose Mike Davis to the Baltimore Ravens. They also added from the Las Vegas Raiders Casey Hayward, so a rotational piece for the secondary, and surprisingly Marcus Mariota from the Raiders. And why is that? Well, I'll get to that in just a bit. They also lost Russell Gage to the Tampa Bay Bucks, who was having a decent breakout late in the season. So he gets paid a little bit to go play for a division rival. Then you lose linebacker Fusade Olukun to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And then you lose Dante Fowler, key piece of your pass rush, to the Dallas Cowboys. And then perhaps one of the biggest moves for the Atlanta Falcons in the offseason was them trading Matt Ryan and his hefty contract to the Indianapolis Colts for a third-round pick in this year's draft. So, indication for the Falcons that it was just time for both sides to move on. They were just finally ready to move on, I guess. So that indication was growing larger when they signed Marcus Mariota, and then when they drafted the quarterback Desmond Ridder from Cincinnati in the third round. So I was kind of surprised that they Ridder fell a little bit further than I thought he would, but he's in Atlanta. They also managed to draft Jake London from University of Southern California. They also got linebacker Troy Anderson from Montana State and a guard Justin Sheffer from Georgia. So the Atlanta Falcons are clearly rebuilding. It's beginning this year, but unfortunately, they don't really have much like financial flexibility and much roster flexibility to do it. Like it's pretty much the same situation as it was in 2021. You got a lot of like short-term like guys on the roster, but you also, at the same time, it's not as bad as it was in 2021 because you did manage to snag like a decent like wide receiver in Drake London, and you could have a potential solution at quarterback in Desmond Ridder. I mean, I think I've mentioned in my filthy casual preview of the NFL draft that Desmond Ridder looked the most NFL ready. It's just that he has like a tendency to get rid of the ball erratically. But if Arthur Smith develops him right, he could be like the Falcons' long-term answer at quarterback. Possibly, though. Unfortunately for the Falcons, they're going to be missing a key weapon in this offense. But even then, it was going to depend on like whether he wanted to come back to football or not. And that was Calvin Ridley, who got suspended in February for gambling, which was weird. So Calvin Ridley is suspended for the year for betting on Atlanta Falcons games. And that's going to have a impact on the offense. I mean, sure, you got Kyle Pitts, who had a really good year, despite the crappiness of the offensive line, despite the crappiness of the third string receivers. But Kyle Pitts had a really productive year in 2021. And who knows who's going to be the starting quarterback? Is it going to be Mariota or is it going to be Ridder? But expect a lot of Kyle Pitts and maybe a good amount of Drake London in that offense until 2023. And then the defense and the offensive line are probably going to be a bigger problem yet again in 2023 because they didn't really do much to adjust the defense. And the offensive line only got one addition with Justin Shafir, the guard. So, man, whoever's going to be a starting quarterback, they're going to have it rough. They're going to have it rough this year. So, for Atlanta, some of their key games in 2022, it's the very first week in New Orleans. I mean, you want to at least give some Atlanta Falcons fans some kind of confidence that, well, we're playing our first game at home against our division rival in New Orleans who may be facing some similar problems than us, like us. And we want to inspire some confidence that, okay, this rebuild is going to be okay. It's going to be all right. But then you get to weeks 2 to 3. You're on an NFC West road trip against the LA Rams and the Seattle Seahawks, who are also rebuilding. So it's like one of those like situations where you want to at least inspire some confidence. Maybe you could like upset the Seahawks, or you could probably steal a win in Seattle, but like you could try to fight hard against the LA Rams. But either way, it's just one of those situations where you have to at least inspire some confidence to your fan base that this rebuild is going to be fine. This is fine. You don't want, it's not like the meme where this is fine, everything is okay, and then there's a bunch of fire around you kind of situation for the Atlanta Falcons. So pretty much my only question going into the season for Atlanta is, well, who starts at quarterback? Mariota he's okay. I mean, he's okay, but unfortunately he hasn't been a starter in the league since he left the Tennessee Titans. And then you have a question about Desmond Ridder, but we'll see who wins the job in after training camp, after preseason, and then we'll go from there. But for the Falcons, unfortunately, there's just going to be like few other rebuilding teams in 2022. They're going to suck based on the talent that they have on defense. The offensive line is a mess. You don't have no Calvin Ridley. You're not sure of your quarterbacks. And that's going to result in what I'm predicting 3 to 5 wins. Yeah, you're going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL. You're probably going to be competing with the Seahawks, the Bears, or maybe even the Panthers for the first overall pick in 2023. So for Atlanta, probably your top goal is to at least establish some confidence in both your fan base and your team itself that the rebuild is going to be just A-okay. And that starts in 2022.